Hello, and welcome to this video about language teaching via Zoom. This training is presented by the Language Resource Center of Columbia University and is made specifically for the Columbia language community. It is meant to be consulted while we are carrying out a rapid transition to teaching online in response to the novel coronavirus outbreak. My name is Christopher Kaiser, and I am the Program Manager of the Shared Course Initiative, which is an interinstitutional collaboration between Columbia, Cornell, and Yale for sharing the less commonly taught languages. In the Shared Course Initiative, students from all three universities use specially equipped distance classrooms to create a shared learning space. The Shared Course Initiative began in 2012, and so our team of about 20 language teachers has accrued quite a few years of pedagogical experience in a distance format. We wanted to share a few observations that may be helpful to you as you begin to teach remotely. I should point out that while the Shared Course Initiative uses a classroom-based model of instruction, the underlying principles that make for an effective distance learning pedagogy are fundamentally the same in both a classroom environment as well as a distributed environment. By distributed, I just mean that the students in the class are distributed in various locations rather than sitting all together in a classroom. Let me also say before we begin that there are many excellent resources for learning how to teach remotely, some of which I have linked to below in the video description. Our recommendations for remote teaching via Zoom that you are about to hear are not meant to be exhaustive. It is simply our compilation of suggestions to help you get started. The Columbia Language Resource Center is planning to develop additional materials to support language teachers in the coming weeks, so please keep checking in with us. Indeed, the LRC is happy to help you think through your language classes in this new format and provide support to you however we can. So, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can find our contact information in the video description. Okay, let's get started. Here's the basic structure of what we're going to cover in this presentation. First, we're going to talk about a few things that you need to go over before you start teaching. I realize that some of you may have already begun your teaching. If that's the case, then this will be a good review and a few things that you might be able to take care of now that you've already started. We'll talk about a few things that you can do to make sure that the classroom space is optimized for language teaching. We'll go over a few of the basic Zoom functions, especially as they relate to language teaching, things that language teachers will definitely need to use and that they will find useful in replicating the types of activities that they do in a face-to-face classroom. We'll talk about the ways in which you need to structure language lessons when you teach in a distributed format. To state it briefly, you need to be a little bit more organized, you need to prepare a little bit more in advance, and the language lessons need to be a bit more structured than they normally are when you're teaching in a face-to-face class. When you're teaching face-to-face, there's more of a capacity for improvisation, for doing things at the spur of the moment. While you may get to the point in teaching via Zoom where you can do that, for right now, it's good to make sure that everything is planned out so that students know what's going on and you are able to communicate to them what they should be doing at any given moment. Finally, we'll begin to touch on the topic of adapting language pedagogy. When you move from a face-to-face to an online format, whether it's a classroom-based format or a distributed format, you undergo a transformation. You don't take everything that you did in the face-to-face class and then easily apply it in the distance class. You gradually transform the materials, you gradually figure out different ways of doing things, and you gradually transform your class from a face-to-face class to one that is really optimized for teaching online. In many ways, this presentation will follow the structure that your own learning about how to teach online is bound to take. So early on, when you first start teaching, you're going to be dealing with technical issues, figuring out how to use Zoom, how to invite students, how to have basic interactions. Over the next week or so, after a few lessons, you'll be working on a little bit higher level activities such as facilitating communicative competence and online socialization. You'll get more out of interactions with students. You'll get students to express more of their personality. You'll learn a few shortcuts and a few ways of getting things done in class that at the beginning were really quite difficult to do. And then finally, over time, students and instructors will be able to really express their own creativity, their own style in this particular format. It's something that's relatively easy to do in the face-to-face class, but it's something that you need a little bit more structure and a little bit more scaffolding to do in a distributed format. So, talking about what you should know before you start or what you should know as you are starting in the first days of teaching online. I think it's important for us to reflect on why it is that we are teaching remotely. Why do we have to do this? And the reason is that the coronavirus is transmitted through human-to-human contact, through breathing the same air as somebody who has the virus. And so we really need to take seriously the request that we practice social distancing. So the reason you're teaching remotely is so that you are staying away from large groups of people, like groups of people that might be in a classroom. You should take a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with Zoom on your own. There's a lot of features in Zoom and features that you might use later on once you become more comfortable, but you can take as much time as you need to see how it all works and how it all fits together. The way to do this is to sign in to your Zoom, and you can do that by going to Courseworks. So let's go to my Courseworks, type in courseworks.columbia.edu, log in, and log into my class. Go to Zoom class sessions. So here, you'll probably have your class meetings listed. But what you can do, rather than clicking on the meeting ID for that particular class, you can go to Personal Meeting Room and then scroll down to Start This Meeting. This is your personal meeting ID. This is not associated with the class sessions that have already been scheduled for you by CUIT. So you would click Start This Meeting, and then Zoom would open, and then you would have an open Zoom meeting with just yourself in it, and you were able to look at the different features, look at the buttons across the bottom, see how it all works, and practice for as long as you need. And as you're doing this practice session, if you'd like, you could invite a colleague, or even you could join from another device. So you could open it on your laptop, but then join that Zoom meeting from your telephone, from your smartphone as well. Okay, so let's go back. It's really important to establish a back channel. What does that mean? A back channel is a channel of communication that you and your students have agreed upon for speaking to each other in case there's some type of issue, whether it be a technical issue or if a student is sick or unable to come to class. It's important for students to be able to reach you if they're not able to use Zoom or if they're experiencing some type of problem with their computer. I recommend using either email, and really in that case you would just need to say, okay, our back channel is going to be email. If you can't log in, if you're having any trouble, just send me an email and I'll be checking and I'll be able to respond to you and help you if you need help. Another option is to use the chat feature of Canvas, and you might think of another back channel that works well on your own. However, I do not recommend using your students' personal phones as a back channel. I believe that it's better to keep all of your communication on a more formal system of communication like email or like Canvas. It's important to ask your students for their buy-in. What do I mean by that? I think it's important to say to your students, we are all together in this. We are in this challenging time, and everybody needs to pitch in and do what they can to help. So your students are not just simply passive recipients of what's happening, but they're active co-constructors in making sure that your class continues to be successful. If you don't ask for student buy-in, they won't know that they're supposed to take on this active role. However, if you do ask for their buy-in, for their participation, for their patience, and for their understanding, then they'll be more likely to give it. And it is truly the case that we do need everybody to help out here. And there is an upside to asking your students to contribute to the class in order for it to simply function. And that is that students will take on more of an active role and that the hierarchy that is a natural part of any face-to-face language class that takes place in a formal classroom setting at a university like Columbia will become a little less pronounced. So the students and the teacher are all engaged in a common effort, and each of them has very important contributions to make in order for it to go well. Okay, another thing that you should think about before you start or as you're starting is to put systems in place early, especially attendance tracking. We don't know exactly what's going to happen over the next few weeks and months, so it's important to try to set things up in a way that they can run on their own without you necessarily keeping track of everything that happens. In other words, it's important to have a plan. And I think this is especially important when it comes to attendance. As we proceed through this experience, it may happen that there are weeks in which some of your students are out because they're sick, and others are still continuing to take the class. Later, those students who were sick have gotten better, but other students are sick. So it's important to keep track of when students are present and when they're not present. And there may also come a time when you, the teacher, are unable to attend class. And if that happens, it's important to have a plan in place so that the students can see, okay, I see that the teacher is away, so I know that I need to study and I need to work on my own. And in fact, I can pair up with another student who was away at a time that I was present for class, and we can exchange notes, and we can teach each other, and we can help each other learn what the other one doesn't yet know. That way, students aren't simply waiting for the teacher to get better and to start managing the class again. They know well in advance that they should be managing the class and their own participation in the class on their own. And finally, it's important to be mindful from the very beginning that circumstances may change. When I first started giving this workshop last week, we didn't know that classes were going to be canceled. As I continued to give the workshop, we found out that classes would be canceled until spring break. And then today, as I'm recording this, we discovered that classes will be canceled for the rest of the semester. So just in the span of 1 week, circumstances have changed considerably. So it's important to keep in mind that what you start doing at any given moment may change later on. So it's essential to cultivate an attitude of resilience and flexibility. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how you can prepare the virtual classroom space for language learning. One really important aspect of a successful online language class is for every participant to identify a quiet room where they will not be interrupted and where they're able to access a stable internet connection. It is not a good idea to go to Starbucks. It's not a good idea to join from outside. It's not a good idea to join from an iPhone or a small tablet. It's a good idea to sit at a desk in a somewhat formal setting, as formal as can be given the circumstances, and to use a laptop as well. Another thing that both you, the teacher, and students should do is testing in advance. Try opening Zoom, going through what you would like to do with Zoom, and learning how it works. It's always a good idea to have already practiced with Zoom before you're in front of your students and in a high stakes situation, which is having all of your students looking at you and expecting you to do something. Testing in advance is crucial. When you are teaching with Zoom, it can help if you and your students have access to headphones and a microphone. Many students have earbuds that they can use that also have a microphone that allows them to speak on the phone. This is great because it's a pre-existing piece of equipment that they have and that they can use to help improve the audio quality, not just of their own individual participation, but also of the whole group. When you have lots of students who are picking up some of the sounds from the Zoom meeting and then putting them back into the microphone of the computer, it happens from time to time that you can get little bits of feedback. And so in order to avoid that, and in order to avoid other extraneous noises like paper rustling or scratching or typing, it's good to have a microphone and headphones as well. So there are a few things that you should do before you start teaching your first lesson or before you start teaching any lesson. One is that you should assemble all of the materials that you're going to use in one place. So if you're looking at a couple of files, say a picture and a PowerPoint or a website, it's a good idea to have them already preloaded so that you can access them quickly. You don't want to waste a lot of class time Googling online newspaper or trying to find a YouTube video. It's good to have it already there so that you can get right to it whenever the lesson calls for it. It's also a good idea, especially in the early stages, to run through your lesson to see if it makes sense, to see if it works well in the distance format, or if there are changes that you need to make. Also, it's a good idea to make sure that your computer, desktop, and your browser are clear of any extraneous clutter, and you should ask your students to do the same. If you're using Zoom and you're sharing your screen, and you have a couple of things on your desktop that you might not want your students to see, like your picture of your dog, it might be a good idea to just clean it up, put it in a folder, and get it out of the way. So too with your web browser. When you open a web browser, it often shows the sites that you visited most frequently. You might clear that out so that your students aren't seeing, your Facebook page or anything like that. It's also a really important idea to set expectations for student behavior during class. When students move from a formal classroom to informal spaces like their living space, then they may feel that they don't need to be as formal, that they can relax a bit, that they can attend to other things, that they can surf the internet, or they can be doing other things in their personal space. It's important to remind them that this is still a credit-bearing Columbia language class, that they need to attend to what's going on in class, that they need to behave in an appropriate way, and that they really need to pay attention. It's very easy to get lost in the chat. It's very easy to start browsing other websites when you're already looking at the computer. If you need to remind your students about this, that's fine. Just let them know what they should be doing. Students today are often called digital natives, and that's a good thing in some ways because they already understand how many of the basic functions of computers and mobile devices work. However, they may not fully understand the ways in which they should use these devices for the specific application of language learning. So you, the teacher, should let them know what your expectations are of them in the language class that's being conducted in the distributed format via Zoom. Okay, so let us take a look at some of the basic Zoom functions. I imagine that by now you have already experienced some of these functions, such as starting the Zoom meetings from Courseworks or sending content. But these are some of the most important things that you'll need to do in a language class, and things that can make your language class that's taught via distance most like your language class that you teach face-to-face. So let's just go over it briefly. When it's time to start your class, log into Courseworks, go to your class. I've gone to a Romanian class. Go down to Zoom class sessions, and then you will see your list of class sessions that have been scheduled throughout the rest of the semester. Go to that day's class and click on Start, and this will open up the Zoom application, and you'll be taken to your class meeting. You should note that your class meetings have an assigned meeting ID. This is most likely different from your personal meeting ID unless you've chosen for the class meeting ID to be the same as your personal meeting ID. It is a good idea to have the meeting ID that's associated with your classes to be different from your personal meeting ID in your personal meeting room. So you can see in the classes, this meeting ID starts with 748. In the personal meeting room, it starts with 744. So it's a different meeting ID. You could think about it this way. Think about it as having this be your classroom, and then this is your office. So your students can come to class at this meeting ID, but if you wish to have office hours with one of your students, then you could say, meet me at this meeting ID, and we can start a meeting, and have an office hour. Okay, so just to review one last time, to start your Zoom meeting, typically what you would do is go to Canvas, go to your class, go to Zoom class sessions, then select your next class session a few minutes before the class is supposed to start, and click Start. And then Zoom will begin. Your students will be able to follow the same procedure. Your students go to this page and click Start, and that's what brings them into the class. There is another way to access your Zoom account that is not using CourseWorks. If you go to this website here, columbiauniversity.zoom.us, you'll see a different display for your Zoom account. columbiauniversity.zoom.us. And here you can start a meeting, or you can join a meeting, or you can sign into your account. So let me do that. Okay, here's my account. Here I can see my personal meeting ID, and here I can see my user type. So this account, this display, allows you to host a meeting and do the other things that you can do in the Canvas site, but also you can access some more settings and some more information about your profile. This is something that might be useful to use a little later on. You can check out on your own and see if there are things that you can select here that make your class work a little bit better. But for right now, let's not worry too much about that. Okay, so we've gone over how to start a meeting. Let's talk about a very important feature of Zoom that is essential for language classes, and that is sending content, or perhaps it would be better to say sharing your screen. So to share a screen, sign into your Zoom account, open a Zoom meeting. I will start a Zoom meeting with video off. Open. Okay. And then here you have a list of controls. So I can join the audio. I can start and stop the video. I can invite more people. I'm the host, so I can manage participants. Then here I have the option to share my screen. When you click Share Screen, you have a couple of options. You can share your desktop, you can share a whiteboard, you can share an external device, or you can share a specific application. Now, when you are in a language class and you want your students to see your screen, you should think about the differences between sharing your desktop and sharing a specific application. If you share your desktop, which I'll do right now, you have the advantage of being able to show simultaneous things to your students. So you could have a Word document, for example, on one side of the screen, and on the other side you could have an image, or you could have a PowerPoint, and you could have a list of items that you wish to discuss during the class. Keep in mind, however, that there is a disadvantage to sharing your desktop, which is that your students will see your desktop, and as we discussed earlier, you want to make sure that there's nothing on your desktop that you don't want your students to see. Also, if you have a large screen and your students have smaller screens and you share your desktop, then they may be struggling to see all the different things that you're displaying to them. So if you do share your desktop, make sure that the font size that you're using on any particular application that's displaying is large enough for anybody to read, even if they're on a smaller screen. Okay, I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to press Share Screen again, and this time I will share just my PowerPoint, which I have saved as a series of PDFs because I think it's a little easier to use that way. So now, anybody who's connected to me will not see the border of this screen. They'll only see the application that I've selected, and you can tell it's selected because it has this green boundary, green border. So that is another thing that you can do that might give your students a little better view of the specific thing that you're looking at and avoid any distractions. Zoom also has another interesting feature, which is called Whiteboard. This might be particularly useful if you teach a language that entails some type of script. So you can draw and you can create shapes on the whiteboard. Your students can also annotate. So here it says stop share, but on their screen, they have the option to annotate. So you could start drawing something and your students could add to it so that you can work collectively. So this is a built-in feature of Zoom that you might find useful for some applications. Okay, so let's take a look at one more option under share screen. When you are going to share your screen and you're going to, say for example, go to YouTube to watch a YouTube video, then you may wish to select these two options, share computer sound. If you don't select that, then your computer won't send the sound to the people who are joining you through Zoom. And then you may also want to select optimize screen share for video clip. That way, the video quality that your students see will be higher. So you may need to change your settings to do this. So I will go to YouTube and I will find, say for example, a song that I want to send. And you can play it and your students will be able to hear it and follow along. Alternatively, if for some reason this doesn't seem to work well, you could ask your students to take 5 minutes and watch a YouTube video on their own and then come back and report on it. Okay, so let's now talk about the other really crucial feature for language learning, which is Zoom's Breakout Room feature. Breakout rooms are a great way to put students into pairs or small groups. Just as sending content corresponds really well to a part of your lesson that might include a presentation of new grammar structures or new vocabulary, the breakout room section is more of an independent practice, conversation in small groups activity. So right now my Zoom meeting has 7 participants who you can see listed here. I've listed them as students 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I can see myself as well. I'll rename myself teacher. Okay, so let's look at the breakout rooms. We might need to make this a little bit wider so that we can see it fully. Okay, here we go. Breakout rooms. This is the control for the breakout rooms. It says assign 6 participants into 2 rooms automatically, 3 participants per room. So if you select automatically, that means that students will be randomly paired or grouped together. If you select manually, then you assign which students work with which other students. I prefer automatically because I've noticed that in a language classroom, students often work with the same partners. I think it's good to mix it up and have students work with different people. This does that automatically. So I'm going to choose assign 6 participants into 3 rooms so that the students can do pair work, two participants per room. Then I'll do create breakout rooms. And here you can see which pairings have come up. Student 1 with student 5 in breakout room 1, student 2 with student 4 in breakout room 2, etc. If you go to options, you have a few extra controls, some of which are incredibly helpful. Here it says breakout rooms close automatically after. Say you only want to have students speak with each other for 3 minutes. You can make it 3. And after 3 minutes, the students would be brought back into the main room. I'm going to choose to make it 1. Now I go to open all rooms, click, and the students have been asked to join the rooms. Okay, while we were waiting for the students to join, we ran out of time, but I'll keep the rooms open for just a moment so we can see how they work. I'll click on breakout rooms again. Right now I'm in the main room. But now I can see the 3 breakout rooms that are happening, and I can step into one of the breakout rooms. So let me join breakout room number 2. Okay, joining. All right, now here, I'm in a room with just student 2 and student 4. So in this way, I can move between the different rooms. So let me exit this breakout room, leave breakout room, and return to main session. And now I will go and visit breakout room number 3. And the students will just see me suddenly appear in that room, and I'm able to answer their questions or help out in any way that I need to. Okay, so I think it's time for us to close the breakout rooms. I picked close now, and it says all participants have been given 60 seconds to leave their breakout rooms. And there's a countdown timer that they can see, so they know that they need to come back to the main session. At the end of the time, you will see all of the students come right back to the main session. I should also point out that during the breakout rooms, you're no longer able to send the content to all of the students. In the main room, you can share your screen by clicking Share Screen. But if you want to share the screen to the students that are in the breakout rooms, you have to enter the breakout room that they are in. You cannot send it to everybody all at once. Okay, so these were some of the major Zoom functions that I think you need to use when you are teaching your class. As I mentioned earlier, sending the content might correspond a little more with the presentational mode that you use when you're sharing something with your students. Breakout rooms, instead, are really good for student-to-student interactions. So let's talk a little bit about how you need to structure language lessons when you're teaching in a distributed format. Teaching in a distributed format requires a little more structuring, a little more advanced planning. This is especially true at the beginning of the time that you're teaching through Zoom. It's also important that your students become familiar with how Zoom works and the various functions that it has. In my opinion, one of the most powerful ways in which instructors can structure lessons in the distributed format is to use the content as a guide for students. The content is a continuous visual reminder of what the students should be doing at any given point in time. If you say to a student through Zoom, go to page 231, or talk with your partner, or send a message in the chat, you say it just once, it's ephemeral, it goes away. If you're using your screen share, and that screen share is tracking with what you are expecting the students to do at any given time, then they're easily able to refer to it and see what they need to be doing. So let's look at a few examples of this. I'm going to share a few slides from a Italian 1 class that I taught via distance a few years ago. And you'll see how each slide indicates in one way or another to the students what they should be doing and where we are in the lesson. Okay, so I'll pop out of my presentation, and then I will share my screen, and I'll share my desktop. Okay, so let me make this a little bigger. Now, I'm using a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. You don't have to. You could use some other type of content, such as a Word document or an image. Okay, in this lesson, we're going to talk about the question, "Que tempo fa?" How is the weather, or what is the weather like? So during the presentation portion of the lesson, I have a couple of images that are accompanied by text. And so I'll present a couple of images from Italy that describe certain weather conditions. So this is a landscape in Tuscany, fa bello, c'è sole. So I'll talk a little bit about nice weather. It's nice, there's the sun is shining. Then I'll present the next slide, fa brutto e nuvoloso. So it's not so nice, it's cloudy. Okay, so I can present a couple of different things. And at this point, I get to piove, which means it's raining. And this is a kind of strange word in Italian because piove, the word itself, means it is raining. 3 words in English. So to kind of drive home the point of how this word works, I'm going to have the students listen to a song called Piove by the Italian singer Giovanotti. So I will exit the presentation, and then I'll go to YouTube, and I've already queued it up. So we're going to listen to this song, and the students should be able to hear it. I'm going to scroll down where they have the lyrics, and we'll listen to the song together and talk about it after. Once we've done that, I'll go back to the presentation, make it larger again. Then we'll move into a slightly different part of the lesson where the students will open up their book. Notice that I have indicated page 121 under the section Que tempo fa. This is a part of the textbook that describes some of the weather vocabulary and some additional words that I haven't gone over yet. So this is a visual reminder of where the students are within the lesson and what exactly we're doing. They know where to be, page 121. And so I go over a few more images, and I'm asking them, Que tempo fa? What is the weather like? I haven't given them the word for it is snowing, but they can see it in the book, and I ask them to provide it. I do a few more of these. And then I ask them, okay, now we're going to close the book, and I can see everybody closing the book. And I will ask them to describe this image without using the book. And now I'm going to change the question a little bit. They've closed the book, and they know that they're supposed to have the book closed because it still continues to say close the book. And now I'm asking them the question, Che tempo fa dove sei adesso? What is the weather like where you are now? This is an interesting question because normally in a classroom it seems quite artificial. We're all in a classroom together, we're all in the same place, so the weather is going to be the same. But this is a legitimate question now. Our students are in different places in the world, and so they can answer how the weather is where they are specifically. And I like this question, so I'm going to extend it a little bit. I'm going to put them into breakout rooms so they know that they need to ask the question, what is the weather like? And they need to describe the weather where they are. So then I would go back out of the full screen. I would go over to Zoom. I will start the breakout room, and let's do different rooms. Okay, I want them to be in groups of 3 this time. So I will open all rooms, and they've been invited to join the rooms, and they're joining. In the meanwhile, I'm going to broadcast a message to all, and I'm going to remind them of the question, which is Che tempo fa dove sei adesso? What is the weather like where you are now? I'll broadcast that to all of the participants. I let them discuss it for a while, and then I close the rooms, and they have 60 seconds to come back. They've done a little bit of work in groups. We'll come back together, and now we're going to do an activity that uses a feature of Zoom, and here you can see that I've said specifically use the annotate feature to identify where you are and write what the weather is like. So what I want them to do, and what I can also do, is to use annotate, and I'm going to write on this map. I'm going to draw, and I will draw an arrow to New York City. And then why don't I use text here, because it might be a little cleaner, and I'll write Chris. I'll write nome, Chris, città, New York City, che tempo fa, fa freddo. And the students are able to do this as well. So this map would populate with all the students' locations and descriptions of where they are. Okay, so let's clear that. Clear all my drawings. Clear all drawings. There we go. All right, so this would probably take us a couple of minutes, and I think it would be a lot of fun actually to learn about what the weather's like in different parts of the country, or if your students are in different parts of the world, in different parts of the world. Okay, finally, at the end of this lesson, I have written down the homework. I've put it here. Your students would probably find it in Canvas as well, but they have it here just so they can be sure and so that we're all on the same page. If they have any questions, they can ask questions about the homework at this time. As you were able to see, the screen share was not only containing the content of the lesson, but it was also explaining the instructions in the lesson, and it was providing a framework for the students to follow along with what was happening. It would not have been possible to do this had I not created a highly structured lesson and thought through how every aspect of that lesson was going to work. Let's move on to a slightly different topic. Another very important aspect of having structured language lessons in a distributed format is for you as a teacher to have clear expectations and clear description of what your teacher presence will be like. When will you be available to your students? When will you be checking your email? When will you be checking the course site? This is good pedagogical practice anyway, but in a distance context, it becomes incredibly important for students to understand when they'll be able to access a teacher and when they can expect a response to a question. And in a related way, you need to rely much more on your learning management system. In the case of Columbia, that is relying on Courseworks. Your Coursework site, in many ways, is a type of structure that substitutes the structure of the physical classroom. So in a physical classroom, your students go there, they know where it is, they know that you'll be there, and they know that they can ask you questions and interact with you in that specific context. The LMS can in some way replace that structure and become a different kind of structure, a different fixed point that students can find you at and can interact with you and can get your assistance throughout the course of the lesson. Okay, so I'd like to make a few initial remarks about adapting language pedagogy in a distance context. What I'm going to say here is really just a few things to start. The Language Resource Center is planning to put together a series of materials that you will be able to access over the coming weeks that will help you with some of the specifics of adapting your pedagogy from a face-to-face classroom to a distance format. I think the biggest point to keep in mind is that changing the way that you teach and adapting the way that you teach is a gradual transition. It is not like flipping a switch. You cannot take everything that you did in the face-to-face classroom and have it work perfectly in the distance classroom. Rather, you need to understand that it will take time, that it will be the accretion of many little solutions to problems that you are able to solve over the course of several weeks. In order to aid with this transition, you need to ask for help from your students. Their buy-in is crucial, as I mentioned at the beginning. As I said, it will entail finding ways to do something that you did in the face-to-face format, now in the distance format. And so as you find a solution to, say, walking around your students when they're working on something, when you are in a face-to-face class, you ask students to work in groups of 2, and then you can circulate and see what they're doing. You cannot do that when you're in a distance format. Your body is limited to where you are physically. So you can find a solution. You can use the breakout room, and you can move between the different breakout rooms, and you can figure out the kinds of issues that your individual groups of students have by moving from one room to the other. Another way to put this is that you can begin to reflect on the affordances and on the constraints of using the distance format. So a constraint is something that you aren't able to do in the distance format, but an affordance is something that the distance format allows you to do particularly well. One notable thing that the distance format allows you to do is it allows you to look deeply at texts. It allows you to put the text in front of the students' faces because they're looking at the computer screen. You're able to analyze a poem very closely. You're able to look at an image or a video very closely, and you can attend to it. You can talk about it. And in some ways, this type of focus on the text that is made possible by screen sharing through Zoom aligns with the notion of the multiliteracies framework which is all about figuring out ways to draw meaning, cultural meaning, linguistic meaning, deeper meanings out of text by closely examining them and understanding what they do within a given context. So I highly recommend becoming familiar with how you can use Zoom to capitalize on this particular affordance. Each individual portion of a lesson plan, the presentation, the comprehension check, the guided practice, the independent practice, will require different kinds of adaptations, different kinds of affordance locating activities. So with the presentation, you certainly have the screen share. With comprehension checks, you could use the chat function to have people answer, or you can even use the chat function or the response function to see whether somebody understands yes or no. These are just some examples of how you can adapt your language pedagogy to the distance format. Now, I should mention that there is a rather robust literature dedicated to teaching in this way. One text that I particularly like is by Meskel and Anthony, and I'll post this at the very end. And they go into some more specific techniques that you might use when you're teaching in a context like this one, such as corralling, saturating, using linguistic traps, modeling, etc. In the coming weeks, we're going to be posting a few more videos and a few more materials that will help you get into the specific techniques of teaching in the distance format. Okay, so thank you for joining me. I hope this answers some questions that you may have had as you begin teaching your Columbia language class online. Here's some information on how to reach us. You can go to lrc.columbia.edu for the Language Resource Center page. You can go to lrc.columbia.edu/SCI for information about the Shared Course Initiative. And you can feel free to email us as well. If you have any questions or if there's anything we can do, please let us know. We're happy to help. And be sure to stay tuned, because we're going to be producing more material about how to teach with Zoom, and we look forward to sharing it with you.